David Breeden. I'm the senior minister at First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis, a historically humanist congregation, and this is Coffee and Wisdom. This is a humanist perspective on theological questions. This week, we've been considering Reinhold Niebuhr, considered by many to be the greatest of American theologians. He lived from 1892 to 1971, 20th century theologian. His book, published in 1932, Moral Man and Immoral Society, A Study in Ethics and Politics, again, is a central book. Cornel West, one of our greatest living theologians today, says it is the greatest book in theology. And Cornel West is looking at it from a perspective of Reinhold Niebuhr being two different kinds of philosophers, theologians in time. The 30s one that leans toward a democratic socialist viewpoint in his Christianity, and then a later one from the 40s and 1950s that we'll be looking at a little bit next week. Now, I set up the idea on Tuesday about Christian realism. Most people consider Reinhold Niebuhr the originator of Christian realism. What does that mean? Well, it talks about the sinfulness of humanity, the freedom, the free will of humanity, and the validity and seriousness of the Great Commandment. I will quickly tell you what the Great Commandment is. It is Matthew 22, 37 through 40. Jesus said unto him, Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy mind. This is the first and great commandment. And the second is, like unto it, Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. The Great Commandment. Well, what do we humanists think about that? Well, the Great Commandment, hey, yes, we say love nature and all living things. Love is a really, really good thing to do, especially with all the living things in the planet. Yeah, great idea. What is the humanist response to the idea of the sinfulness of humanity? Well, when Reinhold Niebuhr came up with this list of Christian realism, liberal Christians and liberal humanists really didn't have much to say about it, but we'd already heard of this Charles Darwin guy. And the fact is, well, no, there's no such thing as original sin. We don't carry sin around with us from our birth, but primates are not the most angelic things there are. Primates have particular ways of being, and we human beings, we often get very prideful, but actually we're primates, and we have sharp teeth, and we do have some abilities to hurt each other, but we also have some abilities to band together and be kind to each other. So we got to take it where we can get it, we humanists think. So what is the humanist response to the Christian realistic idea of the freedom of free will, or the freedom of humanity? Well, that's a hard question. Science has yet not solved the question of whether or not we do have free will. It's a fascinating question, and there are lots of fascinating answers to it. What I would say as a humanist is, well, number one, the sun will burn out in 5 billion years. There is an end to this that we can't stop, because there's not a lot we're going to be doing about winding up the sun to keep it going. But until that time, we've got some work to do, and that work is helping each other and in saving the planet and its living things. So we've got some stuff that we can choose to do in, well, if we can call it free will if you want to, maybe we have to, but let's just go do that, because it's a very, very good idea. As many wise people have said, we don't know if we have free will, but we need to act as if we do. Now, I mentioned the introduction to Moral Man and Immoral Society, in which Niebuhr writes this. The thesis to be elaborated in these pages is that a sharp distinction must be drawn between the moral and social behavior of individuals and of social groups, national, racial, and economic, and that this distinction justifies and necessitates political policies which a purely individualistic ethic must always find embarrassing. Is that actually true? It makes a lot of sense to say that we can have very moral individuals, and then though that morality somehow gets turned into only self-interest as it expands into larger political groups. That does make a lot of sense. It may or may not be true, and it is something we definitely need to think about. And we're going to think about it some more next week on Coffee and Wisdom. But meanwhile, let's think of it in this way. As I say, Dr. Cornel West, one of the great theologians of our own time, none of us alone can save the nation or world, but each of us can make a positive difference if we commit ourselves to do so. And Cornel West's most famous saying, justice is what love looks like in public. You see how he's also dealing with this Niebuhrian idea that we have a individual morality, we have a social morality. How do we get those two together? Well, we get out there and we work for the planet and living things, and we work toward justice, because justice is about this larger political sphere. And Angela Davis, who says you have to act as if it were possible to radically transform the world, and you have to do it all the time. Really, we don't have a lot of choice. And if we want to really be that moral individual, to get out there and do all we can to help make our society and our world more just. We all have different ways of doing it, but we humanists think that we do have a call toward paying the rent on the planet while we are here by doing as much good as we can. That book I've been talking about shadows into the next decade, and what a decade it was. 1931, the beginning of the Great Depression. Then this book is going to come out after the Second World War, The Irony of American History, by Reinhold Niebuhr, the position of America in the world community in the light of her history. Now, America was kind of top dog just after the Second World War. Our manufacturing base was undamaged by the bombings from the war, and we were in a pretty good position to do some major ruling of what was going to happen next, build the United Nations and New York and that kind of thing. So where was our responsibility in Niebuhr's mind when you have this problem of moral man, individual, but immoral society? How is that going to add up in an age in which the atomic bomb exists? And as I mentioned on Tuesday, Niebuhr said there were three kinds of moral decisions, three ways we can make them. One being pathetic, we just don't make a decision, it's just all accidental. Another is ironic, that is, we think we're making a decision based on morality when we're actually making a decision based on our own self-interest. And then the tragic, in which we must choose consciously between the best of two bad options. This is a bad option, that's a bad option. Which of these two do we choose? We're going to consciously choose them and then live up to the responsibility of having to make a choice. And those are the questions I really want to think about next week on Coffee and Wisdom, when I will be talking more about Cornel West, one of the greatest theologians of our time, The American Evasion of History, A Genealogy of Pragmatism. He is one of the major pragmatist philosophers in the tradition of John Dewey. His most famous book, Race Matters, from 1993, and a follow-up bestseller called Democracy Matters, Winning the Fight Against Imperialism, and one of my favorites of his, Prophetic Thought in Postmodern Times. in which he discusses very directly the ideas of Niebuhr and the ideas of the pragmatist school, which were not exactly compatible. And that's where the philosophy comes in that we do not want to evade. Well, I want to send out a big thank you for financial support for Coffee and Wisdom from Anita Martinez, Marcy Lessler, and Rin Nippling. Thanks so much for helping us out and keeping us doing these broadcasts. And also on 9 a.m. Central Time on Friday mornings, we do have a time to talk about these ideas. What about this Niebuhr guy? What about this Cornel West guy? How are all of these ideas fitting together in a sense of a humanist morality? Love it if you join me. If you need the Zoom link, email me, minister@firstunitarian.org, and I'll see you at 9 a.m. on Friday. Thanks a lot for joining me today, and think about that moral vision. It's out there. Keep thinking. Thank you.